let's come back. We're talking about civilization. We're talking about time forms, very large time forms, of how language is the way in which time forms in civilization not only operate like time in nature and the natural four-dimensional universe, but over many thousands of years, based on developments of millions of years, it has developed a triple braid. And that triple braid of time forms is able to bring a quality of accessing the dimensions of consciousness much easier if one knows how to really read and write. And that the establishment of a first threshold of a discursive language where someone, at first just rare scribes, could write and pass it to someone else who could write so that they could read, and that this reading and writing after about 350 years produced the first generation where there were enough of them and they were aware. As Moses says about Adam and Eve, they were aware that they were naked and sought to clothe themselves. And Eve was the one who learned and understood the meaning that reading and writing brought one to the presence of one's natural nakedness, openness to everything. Not just an apple from the tree, but the suggestion of a serpent in the tree, but the cultivation of an orchard and the communication of that Kundalini energy, that this is like that. This is Newgrange. Newgrange is finished about 3200 BC. The quality of Newgrange is that by being finished in 32 BC, it had to be begun before then, and it took about 150 years. It took the space at 25 years per generation. It took about 6 generations so that the 7th generation would be able to culminate it and finish it. If one goes back from 3200 BC, that's 5,200 years ago it was finished. In Ireland, in the Boyne River. Do you understand? This is before dynastic Egypt. This is before I Ching, China even had the first glimmer. This is about the time of the Mahabharata in northern India, classically. Going back 150 years is 3350 BC, which is the millennium of that achievement of a written language. So that a millennium is a commemoration of a reference wave that precedes what in 4000 BC, Eve informing Adam that they were naked and needed to be clothed, very nicely clothed. Eve was feminine. The millennium then as a reference wave is a precursor of the way in which a carrier wave establishes the conscious recognition of a developed meaning that is beyond, quite beyond, and that one needs to have a bridge to that beyond from where you used to be. Yes, it was past, but that past had an achievement that now has come to fruition. The apple in the orchard. The cultivation not just of plants and animals, minerals, metals, people, not just the taming of them, but the cultivation. Whole orchards, whole fields, whole developments, medicinal chests of different minerals that one could use, of different metals that one was beginning to understand, different social, cultural interchanges that one was beginning to understand. So that a millennium is so poignant with promise, but the promise in a millennial way is a challenge. If the challenge does not meet a response, as Toynbee painstakingly points out through 10,000 pages, the regression that sets in kills the sickening civilization eventually. They die. We're, as he pointed out, in the early 1960s. We're close to the condition that Søren Kierkegaard entitled a book of his existential philosophy, The Sickness Unto Death. We're suffering from the sickness unto death. We have to have a response, not an over response, not an under response, not a no response, to the challenge of a millennial situation that can only be met through the equilibrium of the opposites become shaped into symmetries, and that the symmetries be complementarity, so that the wholeness can function not just as a response to the challenge, but to a new way, a refined way. And the last carrier wave before ours, which came almost 20 years ago, that last carrier wave, the way in which it was met, was characterized by those who met it, the Adam and Eve of that particular carrier wave. They called it the way, with a capital W. And very soon, within about 3 generations, it was literally called the Great Way. In Sanskrit, the Mahayana. But in the original, in Alexandria, it was called a way of what best can be described as the mysterious person. That the mystery of the person is that what cuts the facets of the jewel of the prismatic person is the word. The word is spoken language, but the word connotates definitely the way in which a spoken language has its registry as a response to a challenge, as a written language readable. But before it can be read, one has to learn to hear, so that the very high use of a written language is not in a rhetoric of argument or this, that, or the other, or fictions or whatever, but in a poetic, which lifts the language off the page into the voice, and that the oral word then lifts the conscious written word read out loud into the disclosure of language that now is penetratively accumulative, so that when you get used to listening really well, it shows up in that your reading deepens in a way that now you read really well. And you read not just the words, and especially the words in their lines, but you read in between the lines. You read different facets and angles of vision by which one can read those lines, or read that word, or read between lines in all kinds of combinations. You become literately refined. And the first conscious indication of this is that you learn to hear. For those who have ears to hear, let them hear. That's the way it was phrased 2,000 years ago. The quality of Newgrange came poignantly because it was not a tomb. No one was buried there. What happened was a transform of time, a transform of the year into a new year. And the transform of the new year was based on the sun's annual cycle. That its annual cycle was the shortest day, the longest night of the year, was the winter solstice. For us, December 21st. And on the winter solstice at Newgrange, the dawn of the sun is at just the right angle, that it shines down all of the major corridor radius going to the center of Newgrange, like a radii that can be measured, so that one can begin to measure angles of the sun in its midwinter sunrise and begin to understand the geometry of the sun and the earth vis-a-vis the earth, the sun, and the moon. And one begins to then have something that is shown at the very end when the sunrise, starting from such and such an angle, as it goes up above the horizon, the line of sun goes into the radius of Newgrange, and at a particular crucial threshold angle, the sunlight will have crept through the entrance, not the door where you walked in and everybody walks in, but in a upper conduit above the doorway, an opening that allowed the path of light from the sun to do its walking as everyone has walked their feet on the corridor in through this doorway. The sun, through its aperture, now shines its light and comes all the way back to the end of that radius cave, And there one finds carved on the stone a triple spiral. The top two spirals are the most mysterious, discursive symbol of the fertility of women. It is the two breasts. One finds in illustrations all the way through Weir, but all the way through Newgrange, and again one finds it, that here the top symbol is not only the two spirals that uncurve from one and then curve back in from the other. One is a uncurving that goes back through not just the cycle of nature, but the spiral of the magnetic complement to the electrifying energy of the universe, to be the magnetic complement to it that illumines other dimensions, other aspects of it, and then goes back, consistent with it, to a penetrating depth that is the differential, insight, analytic, aesthetic, that one can notice the most minute differences, make incredible discoveries of significance, and one becomes attentive. And this third spiral, in its origin, was not just a spiral, but was a pair of diamonds. One was a single diamond, and the other, based down below, is a diamond within a diamond. The jewel that one is becoming, and the spirit jewel within the jewel that one is in presence. So that one goes back and one finds an incredible array. You find, when you take a camera and look down the entire corridor lit up so that there's just an orange light, you find the light of the sun just a pinprick above from that aperture shining in and lighting up the corridor, and the camera shows a structure, and it's very much like a structure which one can make. This is 3200 BC, begun 3350 BC. This is something illustrating a writing from about 1250 AD, some 4,500 years later. And it's the cover of this study, The Single Monad Model of the Cosmos, Ibn Arabi's concept of time and creation. And one notices this is not just a square of attention, but it is like a scalloped frame that has an artistic, mystical, poetic quality to it that has resonances. And you notice the four and the other four, you notice the eightfold plan. Or rather, the eight-petaled flower, or rather, the quality that one can put phases together in a great complementarity of four natural phases and four phases of differential consciousness raised to kaleidoscopic consciousness, a pair of pairs, vision and art, history and science, and they beautifully come together in folded hands. And that the thumbs, when they are put together, one has a prow of a vessel of conscious time, space, able to explore freely. A cosmos of at least 11 dimensions, all mysterious and more mysterious and more mysterious. Ibn Arabi, here is one of the recent studies, masters of the Muslim world, Ibn Arabi, Heir to the Prophets, in a series, because he lived at a time when it was the apex of the Muslim civilization in such a way that there was a recognition of a tremendous diamonds within diamonds within diamonds that had been presented. And in Ibn Arabi's great energy, he wrote such amazing works by the almost uncountable thousands of lines. We use in the 9th phase of the learning civilization 4 phases for the first year, 4 phases for the second year, which become dimensions of consciousness, which come together and make this quality of 8 phases as an octave set, as an ogdoad structure transforming a mythos like 4 gods and 4 goddesses, making the ogdoad of the ancient Egyptian quality that the final symbolic pair, Osiris and Isis, are a way of going into a bridging beyond, so that there is a 9th quality which cannot be named, should not be named, is not named. That those 4 pairs have an unnameable, not named sourcing. Later on, when language was discursive enough to be able to characterize that 9th in ancient Egypt was pronounced Amun. Later on with 2 M's and with an O, Amun, related to the sun, Ra. And it was the vision of a spirit, Amun-Ra, that the mother of Alexander the Great gave him from his cradle on up into his teens. That he was not just or especially the son of her husband, his father, Philip, but that he was really his spirit. His presence was that inherited from Amun-Ra, and that he should go to the secret oasis out in the Sahara Desert at Siwa, where he would find the confirmation of that. And he was raised with that as his secret, as his presence given him by Olympia, his mother, Olympias, which he eventually did through great travail and brought that quest. And several hundred miles out into the Sahara Desert, more than 2,330 years ago, he found that the confirmation that his mother had told the truth about him. He was not just a royal son, become a man, but he was a divine presence that visioned through the man into something that is bridging into the unknown in dimensions elegantly wild. and founded Alexandria on the coast of Egypt because it hearkened directly back to Siwa through one of the lowest depressions on Earth, the Katara Depression. That was so formidable, almost no one ever traverses that. Many, many hundreds of feet below sea level, having a very peculiar air in the Saharan intense heat. The very vapors from the scorching of the sands and the undersand seepage of a whole ocean of fresh water which underlies that whole area of the Sahara Desert, produced a kind of a mist which was conducive to making mirages from hundreds of miles away, so that the very tops of the great pyramids of Giza, which were covered in a very polished gold, would appear as glints of light in the mirages in the Katara Depression all the way out to Siwa. That here was the glimmer in the light of the divine, the eye at the top of the pyramid in triplicate, that was able to see that this, for Alexander especially, is quite real. And in founding Alexandria, he made a fourth great beacon eye at the top of his light tower of Pharos, some 400 feet high, 40 stories high. He didn't get to build it. He died young. But his lifelong friend and general, Ptolemy, lived, and he built it, and built Alexandria according to the plan, according to the design, and placed that beacon at the top with its great mirrors that would shine that sacred beaconing fire far, far out into the Mediterranean, so that mariners on great enlarging world trade routes would be able to correlate and be able to use the whole eastern part of the Mediterranean as a part of the way in which one was able to do all kinds of things of importance and interest. About 25 miles to the west, a scale model of the Pharos was built, where the Pharos was 400 feet tall as a structure. This was 100 feet tall. And its beacon was like a proportionate angle so that mariners would be able to triangulate where they were with the Pharos beacon, and if they were close enough to shore to be able to understand that we're going to be into shoal country pretty soon, from that subsidiary lighthouse. And it was next to a great temple of Osiris. In fact, it was the cognate because the origin temple of Osiris was on the Nile River at Abydos. At Abydos, one finds the Osirian. But at this site, which was called Tap Osiris Magna, was the place that he was resurrected. He was resurrected because his tuned wife, Isis, was able to take the dismembered Osiris, dismembered by his arch enemy Set, whose image in ancient Egypt was that of a vicious wild red dog of the desert. Set had torn him into 14 parts and buried them in special places. She had used her supernatural supravision to find each of the parts and to remember Osiris so that he was put back together. One part was not found. That was the penis. The penis of Osiris had been swallowed by one of the Nile mud-hugging fish. It was called the Oxyrhynchus. And it was a blind fish that only navigated through a magnetic radar resonance, like eels or like bats. And so a special penis needed to be fashioned, not by magic, but by a transformation that brought a new quality into play in the fertility of the masculine, so that a child that would be born of that transformed masculinity with the transforming feminine would produce a son, a child, who they named Horus. And Horus is the sun that is winged, is the falcon that is tamed and leads the hunter to the game that's really important, is the way in which the perching of Horus onto the hieroglyphs of a cartouche hieroglyphic name of someone means that they are resurrected. They're reborn. Because one of the qualities of Isis Osiris is that those who follow into that exploration and gain those dimensions gain their rebirth. And leading that is a pair. One is feminine, her name is Seshet. And she takes the name of someone and inscribes it on a leaf of a tree called the Persea tree. And as Seshet inscribes the name on the Persea tree, it is a tree from like the really primordial Garden of Eden. It's the tree of immortality. Thoth, behind, writes on a tablet what Seshet writes on the leaf of the Persea tree, so that it is recorded in a written language, a hiero, a holy glyph, a symbol, holy symbols, that if your name is written on the tablet of memory, you will be remembered. And that remembrance will be the recognition that can occur as long as one is remembered. And by extending the capacity of remembering back through, the past is not dead but lives again. It's the new past. And as that new past is restored, the future opens up in the continuum of the vitality of not the dead past stopping at the present, but of the new past prismatically through the presence into all possible worlds, all possible futures. This is what the Learning Civilization presents in its 2-year program. And the 9th phase, the 3rd year, is for individual study, for your own personal quality, or for beginning again with the natural cycle again, but this time alert. And coming into the second year of the conscious vision, art, history, science. These qualities are there and available. And next week when we come in to presentation number 50, we will take a look at the way in which one of the forerunners of the mysterious person Aeon from around 0 BC, 1 AD, one of the forerunners of that. We don't know his name. In Qumran, they called him the teacher of righteousness. In Alexandria, they called him, in Arabic, Nebi Daniel, the prophet Daniel, who found a way to stagger a kaleidoscopic conscious development of remembering, so that it brought back into play the very origins of written language as the basis eventually of civilization, back some 4,000 years before him, some 2,200 years before us. More next week.